Hi everyone, I'm carrying on my look at the Iranian National Championship which Alireza Firouzja played in 2016. Now he was only 12 years old at the time and he won this championship, and it cemented his place not just in Iran but in the entire world as an absolute chess prodigy. I mean, you can see he's just a kid by that picture below, and he turns up and blows away the field. Now I've covered the first two rounds, he won those games, I'll link the whole playlist at the end. He then drew in round 3, this is his round 4 game. Yes, he was playing a weaker opponent with black, but it's still very instructive, this game, a lot of interesting moments. So Alireza kicks off with knight f3, and I find this whole opening sequence actually very instructive. So it's the King's Indian attack with pawn to g3, and a lot of beginners actually play this stuff, or when you're young and you're getting taught chess. You know, I've taught students this opening because if you see in the first 4 moves here, white's developed 2 pieces, castled the king, you're super safe, and that's the great thing about it, and then you can start playing. Now you do give black the centre here, as we can see, but then you go pawn d3. Now black has different setups here. You didn't have to bring the bishop outside the pawn chain, but that's how they're playing. And white's now going to strike at that centre, either with e4 or c4. So that's how you're going to then get your share of the centre later in the game here. So we had pawn h6 played to give that bishop some room. Now the knight develops here. And this is very typical too, not putting the knight here, but sticking it here, again to support one of these pawn breaks in future. So pawn e6, that classic pawn triangle. This pawn now came to b3, bishop e7, bishop b2, again just rapid development in this opening. Knight b to d7, rook e1 prepares to push e4 here, and now after castles, Alireza kicks on with pawn e4. And here black actually has a choice to make about what they want to do with the pawn structure. Again, I find this quite instructive. You know, if you analyse with an engine right now, it's telling you you can take that pawn and it's a completely level position. You can retreat the bishop like this. You could go like this. You could even go here. The key thing to understand is that if you're going to change the pawn structure, understand what you're going in for. So black took here, which is fine. Say you retreat the bishop, well then okay, white could actually kick on with e5 immediately, and you have to understand where this knight is going after this. The typical plan here is knight c7, you play for c5, you kind of play in the centre and on the queen side, but you're going to get attacked here on the king side most likely. Moves like this, maybe knight h2, g4, typical attacking ideas. So this is the key thing to understand at moments like this. Black decides to take in this position here, the pawn recaptures, and okay, now white has the central space, but black is very solid. So just something to be aware of when you're using a computer to analyse. So the bishop now dropped back to h7. One thing I'm indicating here is that actually bishop g6 or g4 was slightly more accurate. It just puts more questions to the white king side here. You know, do you want to play h3? Possibly a weakening move, who knows? But after bishop h7, white has slightly more of a free hand to just play in the centre now. So we had queen to e2 developing, queen c7 from black. So 12 moves in, both players castled, pieces out, rooks connected, all textbook stuff. And Alireza now goes a3, different moves, nothing too wrong with that one. a5 from black, also a good move. The rook centralised here, black did the same. Pawn e5 now took some space. Yes, you give up the d5 square, but Alireza is planning to go c4 in a moment to then kick that knight out of that square. And in the meantime, he's gained space. This pawn's often good for then generating attacks against the king. So now this knight came to e4. We had bishop to f8, just tucking back. The rook came to d2, preparing to double. Pawn b5 played, anticipating c4. Alireza plays it anyway, and we now had a captures here. The pawn recaptured, and the knight dropped back. Good move, pressures this pawn, but also looks to come into a4 here. So knight d6 was played by Alireza, and you don't want to be taking this one at this point, you know, giving white this nice passed pawn, pressure against your queen. So instead we just had the knight coming to a4, hits this bishop, Alireza drops it back, and now this knight's actually on quite a nice circuit because it's coming back into this c5 square. First this rook came to the b file, good move. Alireza doubled here, And at this point, this is really an instructive moment because the position's actually roughly level. Yes, white's got some space here, got the knight here on d6, but black has counter chances. The knight can come to c5. That is actually the best move here, by the way. You've got the open b file and so on, bishop blasting down here. Black also has chances. And the reason knight a to c5 was the best move here is because now if white goes knight to d4, which we saw in the game, well, and this is the best move, by the way, when you're running it with the engine, still go knight d4, allowing this tactic. Because this is what black can then do. You can take that e5 pawn, and the point being, well, white can take with the queen here. There's different options. You can also do some knight take stuff, discovery. But if we run with this one, queen takes, you can take with the queen or the bishop here. Say black takes with the bishop. Well, here you don't have the same tactical shots that you do in the game. So the best would be to retreat the queen back to e3. But in the game, you can go knight to b5 because the rook's on b6 here, and you take advantage of some of these back rank issues. But I'll show that one in just a moment here. So we didn't have the knight coming to c5. Instead, the rook came to b6. Looks logical to defend this pawn, but then you leave the back rank. So Alireza now goes knight d4, and here the tactics aren't working for black. So now if you take here, well, the knight can actually take on e6 as an in-between move. You hit the queen on c7, so recapturing is forced, and then white can take here, and you hit g7 with that queen and bishop battery. You also keep the knight out of c5, you hold your knight on d6, so it's a good advantage here to white. So here you can't actually take on e5. Instead, knight c5 was played here, but then bishop c3, threatens to come here, skewering these pieces, and once again this is no good. You can take here with the queen, and this is what I was mentioning. If you take on d6 with the bishop, well, now there's this amazing move of knight to b5, so you hit queen and bishop here, and you don't have time to take that one, or you get mated here. And therefore, if you take the queen here, well, now you've left the back rank. This is actually mating too. So all subtle tactical stuff, but you just can't win that pawn on e5. And as soon as you can't win that pawn on e5 in this position here, well, now you're having to go rook a6, passive move, defending your pawn, and Alireza goes f4, cementing his position, and that octopus knight on d6. So bishop e7 from black now. We had queen to f3, targeting that pawn. The knight dropped back to cover, and now Alireza gets f5. He's going for the jugular, attacking the king, and black actually took, but there's not so many better moves, because if you don't do anything at all, well, f6 could be coming soon, even giving a piece to then come in on the dark squares here. So the pawn captured, the knight took back, and now there are many threatening checks around the king there. So the bishop chopped it off, queen recaptures, and bishop g5 played, just looking for some counterplay, hitting the rook, trying to get down to the king. So the rook slid across to e2, covers that square. Rook f8 now played. This rook came to the f file, hits the open file, pressures f7, and here black makes a fatal mistake, although it's really not easy. The best would seem to be queen to d7, trying to exchange queens, but then you can actually drop this queen back and the attack rages on. You've still got that octopus knight on d6. So instead rook a7 was played here, but this now allows white to actually pin that knight to the rook. Now you could start with h4 here as I'm indicating, good move, but bishop d4 was played and the knight actually moved, giving the rook. But if you try and defend it, let's say like this, well, now you blocked your queen from defending f7, no good, you could actually crash through. And if you try and come to this square, well, then we can go h4, the bishop can't come here, it blocks the queen, so if it drops back here, you could then double on the f-file, again pressuring here. If you try and trade the queens, we'll slide to h5, keep the pressure on f7, say rook c7 to break the bishop's pin, well then we can just crash through, and black's got nothing better but to actually give the queen here. So this is the problem with trying to actually defend that knight on c5, and this is why black just dropped back, hits the blockading square, gives the rook, takes back with check, so king to h1 played, and then knight d4 came, forks both of these pieces, but Alireza's got it worked out. So he just slides this queen back here, and now you can't take the rook, you don't have time, or then you lose your queen on a7. This is the problem. So instead c5 was played, cementing the knight, but rook b2 was actually the final move of the game. That rook's invading on the 7th, black's pieces are all over the place, completely discoordinated, and f7's soon going to be caving in. So a beautiful game by Alireza. If you want to see the rest of the games that he played in this tournament, then click here. And to never miss a future video, do hit that subscribe button, and thanks very much for watching. See you soon.